Well, welcome to the Scrum Master Power Hour, everyone. Some of you are here for the first time, some of you are regulars, so you kind of know the drill, but our backlog here is very simple. I'm going to just do a welcome and a little bit of an introduction. I will give you some information on an exciting upcoming event that I have in June, and then we're going to get started with our fireside chat with Brian, because I know we're all here to see him and talk with him about how to build a successful relationship between Scrum Masters and developers. We will have, I'm hoping, 15 minutes at least for questions and answers from the audience. So I will help moderate that, but he is here to answer whatever it is on the top of your mind to help you become more successful in your role. All right, so who am I? You probably know me from LinkedIn. My name is Patty. I am an agile transformation coach for a major financial institution here in the United States. I also have my own small business, which is what you probably see the most of on LinkedIn, called Agile Mindset Consulting. I do Scrum Master career coaching. I do small group training and coaching to help new Scrum Masters learn those vital skills. And I also go into companies and do workshops with them. So that's a little bit about me. I started this meetup. Initially, it was once a month last spring, and I decided I wanted to have more momentum with it. So I started doing this weekly in July of last year. And this was with the pure intention of supporting people that are new on their Scrum Master journey. So those of us that are transitioning from other roles, or those of us that are fairly new within the first year or two of their career. Now, as you know, and I've said this to some of you privately, this is not something you can go to school for. So, I mean, you got to figure out how to learn these skills somewhere. And I'm here to support you with this community to help you with that job transition. So, quick poll out there, and I hope the answer is yes. How many people are familiar with user stories? Thumbs up, raise your hand. Brian, that's a good thing. Yeah, okay, good, good, good. You've at least heard of them, you know, the gherkin sentence. Okay, sweet. Well, oh, let me admit somebody else here. All right, so I am launching a new workshop, and this is something I've been super excited about. I've been telling the Power Hour about it every single week, and finally the signups are here. So tell me if this is you, and some of you might be going through this right now. In true user story format, as a Scrum Master job interviewee, I panic and then ramble on aimlessly just to fill the silence so that I can epic fail my interview and never get past round one. Now, you might want to raise your hand or you might not want to raise your hand, but this was me about 2 years ago. I struggled with this so badly, and I realized I had to own my skills. Oh, thank you, Michelle, thank you folks for raising your hand. Like, this is a safe space. Just, you know, fly your freak flag out loud, right? This was me. I was failing every single first round interview. I couldn't get past round one. And finally, I got so mad and frustrated. I said, I'm going to own my skills. All of these things that I was embarrassed to share, including that I was a former science teacher. And I learned how to tell stories, create stories. So no matter what they asked me, I was able to answer with my go-to 3 stories. So I have been working on this format with my private clients, and I wanted to bring this to a group workshop format. So just to let you know, you might see this out on LinkedIn. This is my little graphic that you'll see. But in June, and this is a 2-week workshop, so 2 Mondays in a row, I will be doing a storytelling workshop, how to nail your Scrum Master interview. And this is to help you create powerful stories that demonstrate your skills, and you're not just sitting there speaking like a robot from a textbook. You'll get to practice your story with a partner in breakout rooms. You can receive feedback from that partner, iterate your story, and learn how to creatively apply this story to as many interview questions as possible. That way you have to do less prep than you actually think. So I just put this Eventbrite link out a couple of hours ago. I have 7 tickets left. If you want to take advantage of early bird pricing, it's $99 for the 2-week workshop. And please put in a promo code 50 to get that special pricing. So if you're interested, you can just throw in the chat, interested. I will reach out to you afterwards and send you the link. But I will also drop the link in the chat at the end of the workshop here in case you just want to go ahead and sign up. So that's all I have to say there. More information to come, but I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And we are going to get to the person that I'm super excited to hear from, Brian, as I'm sure you all are. So just to preface this, and I mentioned this in my email a couple of weeks ago, I personally vet out the people that I invite into this Power Hour. I want to make sure that they are real, authentic people. They're not going to BS you, because you probably get enough BS out there. They will tell you the honest truth behind the scenes, what it's like to do their role, and how you as a Scrum Master can better work with them. Because that's the whole goal here, to learn how to work with each other in these new roles that are in this agile world. So without further ado, Brian, I'm going to have you introduce yourself and start out by telling us about your career journey. How did you get to where you are today, which is an application architect at Calendly?
Yeah, thank you, Patty. Like Patty mentioned, my name is Brian Childress. I am an application architect at a small company, but quickly growing, called Calendly. My career journey has not been a straight path by any means. My undergraduate degree is in a field so far removed from software engineering, it may not even be funny. I was able to work in that field for a couple years before deciding to go back to graduate school, maybe look at different career paths, which eventually led me to software development. I've worked in healthcare, finance, I've worked in public sector, private sector, consumer, software as a service platforms, kind of across the board. So I've got quite a bit of experience across many different verticals. Most of my experience lies in dealing with highly sensitive data, specifically in healthcare and in financial institutions. So application security and application resilience are really kind of passion points for me personally.
Excellent. So, like many of us on the call here today who probably experienced the same career journey, not a straight path. You graduated with college, you were like, this is what I'm going to do forever. Can you just tell us where you started? What was your degree in? Because now you piqued my interest.
My undergraduate degree is actually in outdoor recreation with a focus on recreation management. So I spent a couple years, both in college and after college, as a outdoor guide, whitewater rafting, rock climbing, skiing, mountain biking. Kind of all the adventure sports were really a passion area for me and continue to be. As much fun as it is, it turns out that being an outdoor guide doesn't necessarily pay the bills, at least not all of them. And really, I was looking for a different type of challenge. And that's what drew me to go back to school and explore other opportunities. But what's interesting is I'm starting to find more and more the skills that I learned through undergraduate in those first few years in my career. I'm pulling a lot of those into the work that I do now as an application architect.
And I second that, because as I mentioned in the beginning of the call, I was initially very nervous to mention to recruiters that I was a former teacher because I didn't believe that I had the skills. This is me in my own mind. I didn't believe that I had the skills to be a Scrum Master. But now that I'm on the other side, I 100% support what you just said. I picked up so many valuable skills, and it's just about translating them into the language of software development or Scrum. So thank you for sharing that. Can you tell us a little bit about what an application architect does? What do you do all day?
So application architect is an interesting role, and really the title can vary across organizations, kind of depending on how they're structured, the size of the organization. But typically an application architect or someone in an architecture role is more of a senior individual contributor who has deep technical knowledge and also has a breadth of technical knowledge. What becomes interesting in the more senior roles like an architect is we tend to split between the technical aspects of software development and the business aspects of software development. And we really, to be successful, need to have feet in both camps. So really what I do a lot day to day is I spend time understanding our business needs. I spend a lot of time researching new evolving technologies, patterns that exist out in the ecosystem. And I also work with teams to really understand where they are and how I can help them get to where that we need to be able to support the business long term.
Yeah, and I know here the questions are going to get real because that's what we're here to talk about. Now, as we've been talking, Brian, like you know that I've had my challenges as Scrum Master as an Agile coach with silos in an organization, and I'm sure you all sitting out there listening deal with the same thing. And I mentioned to you in some recent teams that I worked with, some of the challenges because of those old legacy silos is that the systems architect is way off somewhere else. And the team and systems architect don't interact in a way that helps that workflow. And it was a huge challenge. And it was a huge challenge for me to even to get them to think that they need to talk to each other early on, right? Before the epics get on the Jira board. Because there's a lot of change and rework that is the cost of those conversations not happening. So from your perspective, can you tell us about the challenges that you face from the opposite side of that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think some of the biggest challenges that I've faced are, again, it really comes down to the communication that happens across teams. And more every day, I believe this, but I often like to say that technology is the easiest part of what we do. Especially from a software engineering perspective, I can Google my way to a solution, but I cannot do the same when it comes to cross-team collaboration and being able to share information that's relevant to interested parties at the right time. And so what I find is, from an architect perspective, from a development team perspective, we're often brought into the conversations very late in the game. And that can be very challenging because a lot of decisions that folks have spent a lot of time on have been made already. And then we have to try and fit the technology around those particular solutions that have been identified. Where for me, my ideal situation is really to kind of be brought in at what I call the napkin stage, where we are really just starting to ideate on the ideas. We haven't gotten to any sort of user stories, wireframes, mock-ups, anything to that fidelity at all. We're just talking about ideas. Because what's interesting when you bring a Scrum Master and someone from product or design and then someone from engineering together to have those conversations of, here is our problem, how can we solve it? A lot of interesting ideas can come up, can bubble to the surface. And I think that gets missed a lot of times when an engineering team or a lead developer or someone is brought in fairly late to the conversation.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was witnessing. And it's like, how many times are we going to make the same mistake before we decide we got to start having those conversations earlier? So if a Scrum Master sees this happening, how do they feel? I hate to use cliche words, but how do they empower themselves? Because sometimes that's what it takes, like digging deep and being vulnerable. How do they get this conversation to start happening when there's a lot of resistance because of the silos? Do you recommend them reaching out and building a relationship? Like, what do you suggest?
Absolutely. If there's someone on your team or another team that you think is friendly and you're able to reach out to and just have a conversation, even before it's necessary to drive a project forward, just building that relationship is huge. And that's something for me that I've always tried to do, is really build that relationship with a new Scrum Master coming onto a team that I'm a part of, is to understand, hey, how can I help you in the work that you're doing, to understand the work that we need to do and how it is that we need to operate as a software team to be able to deliver value.
Yeah, now I want to jump into the next question. This is a great segue because I almost want to ask this question first. I'm this loud, vivacious personality, but I know often not everybody's that way. So how do developers perceive that? How do they, are they afraid of it? I mean, I don't care, I do it anyway, but how do you build the relationship with somebody that might have the opposite personality as you? You may perceive them as not wanting to talk, or whatever story that you're creating in your head. How do you get past that to realize you've got to build relationships with everybody equally?
Yeah, I think a lot of it, Patty, comes down to trust and building that trust. Engineers, I think by nature, tend to be very curious, right? We want to explore, we want to understand how things work. We're very literal. And if you as a Scrum Master are able to show the same type of curiosity towards the problem, that may be a great in as a way to build that relationship and to build that trust. Engineers do have a lot of resistance to being vulnerable. We often say or use the term imposter syndrome, because for many of us, we don't feel like we have the information, we have the knowledge to be able to speak intelligently to a particular area or field. And that's something that I think more senior engineers have identified and are now embracing much more. And the same from a Scrum Master perspective. If we can come in and kind of show that vulnerability, but also that curiosity, we can build that relationship. Now, not every engineer is going to be receptive to that. Some of the personas and the stereotypes out there do exist, but really it's not as often seen as we might think. We tend to just be a little bit more introverted or maybe a little shy. But once we build that confidence as an engineer, we do start to open up. And so finding a way to build that relationship as a Scrum Master developer, it's a great starting place.
And I love that you talked about vulnerability and imposter syndrome, because I know for me, as a non-technical Scrum Master, when I first got started, I was very overwhelmed with just the language that was going on around me. I didn't understand any of it. That made me feel like an imposter. So I think what's interesting for me is to hear your perspective, that the engineers don't feel like they're good enough. Meanwhile, I'm thinking, man, they're geniuses. So thank you for sharing that, because that really gives me some empathy about the people on the other side of the screen, so to speak. I appreciate that. Can you tell us a little bit? I want to now jump into the next question because I think this is a good one. Can you tell us how developers view Scrum and Scrum Masters? And be honest. Remember,
Okay.
because here's my feeling about it. I believe it's better to know what other people are thinking, because then you can do something about it. If people say nothing, or if they are dishonest, that doesn't help anything. And that's what I always say to people. So this is a safe space, Brian.
As you may have experienced or may imagine, developers and Scrum Masters, the relationship can have a lot of tension. There is a lot of animosity among Scrum Masters or developers. There's a lot of confusion that happens. What's interesting is we have the Scrum framework. There are different flavors and ways to implement. But what I find is almost every single project, every single organization, every single team, we end up having to reestablish what is Scrum and what does Scrum look like in our project, in our team. And we have to identify that or reestablish that every single time. And that can be challenging. So what ends up happening is we have developers coming in with various levels of experience, a Scrum Master with various levels of experience coming in. And now we have to all agree on what is the definition of done? What do user stories need to look like? How do we measure velocity, and how do we account for different scenarios that happen within software development? Just because it is such a kind of a fluid process that happens, we have to reestablish that every time. And that can be challenging. Not having the understanding of the software development lifecycle can also be very challenging, I found. Understanding that software development is, it's fluid. It's much more like tending a garden than it is building a house. I think that's just part of the challenge we have from software development in general, is so often we try and compare it to something in the physical world. I'm going to build a house. I'm going to build a bridge. And really, they're not even in the same ballpark. They're so different in the way that they're implemented, that they're thought about. If we try to compare software development to something in the physical world, it can be very, very challenging. And I think for Scrum Masters and folks with less technical backgrounds, that might even be harder to wrap our heads around.
What are some things that folks can do to support developers? Obviously, we want to meet them where they are. Keeping in mind, to your point, I mean, every organization does it differently, and it meaning Scrum. Sometimes people do bits and pieces of it. So kind of accepting the situation for what it is, and accepting meeting people where they are. But also the fact that as a Scrum Master, you're hired to help move the organization forward with agility. Scrum may or may not end up working, right? You could do other frameworks. But how do we meet people where they are, but still push them out of their comfort zone?
I think first, by establishing a shared terminology may help. How do we define features? How do we think about defining user stories and story points? How are we going to measure those? Coming up with some shared verbiage there. Really pushing back on developers and questioning how we can, is there another way that we can approach the problem? Do we need to do some exploration before we dive into this? Really understanding, okay, what is the developer telling me that we need to be doing in order to provide the solution that they've been asked for? Why are they saying that it's going to take some amount of time or be worth 8 story points. And really that may not actually be the case. There may be an easier solution. They may not be considering all the different variables that have to go into delivering that feature. And really kind of pushing back on that and making sure that we are all kind of headed in the same direction. Developers can be very resistant to pushback. Very often we're seen and we consider ourselves to be the experts, and that can be very, very challenging. There's different levels of engineers, and based on kind of their level or their years of experience, you can kind of tell who's going to be more apt to push back on or challenge someone pushing back on their assumptions. And we kind of just have to work through that. It takes time. We have to build that time, that buffer into our sprint work to make sure that we are addressing all the different needs that we might have.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack here, isn't there? We could probably talk for hours and hours and hours. So you mentioned estimation, you mentioned story points. This is a huge confusion point for Scrum Masters, for developers. Do you have any suggestions for Scrum Masters to help facilitate the conversation, to help the developers more accurately estimate?
This probably is one of the more challenging things in software development, is the ability to estimate. I think it first starts with a shared understanding of what it is that we're trying to build. Really well-defined acceptance criteria in user stories. Everyone having a shared understanding of where we are, what we think we need to implement, and then what we think it may take to implement that particular solution. Oftentimes I find when we're in these conversations, when we're in grooming sessions or we're preparing for next sprint's work, we may not be on the same page yet. We may not have a shared understanding of what is the definition of done for this particular feature. And if we don't have that shared understanding, I might think that it's a very easy solution to implement, and someone else on the team may think it's very difficult because they either see something that I don't, or they're factoring in something that we don't actually need to be considering as part of the feature development. The Fibonacci approach to story estimation is still one of the most confusing things because it's done differently on every single team, every single project. And what almost inevitably happens is we tie a story point to something known, which is always an amount of time. So on almost every project, what we end up solving is we'll say, okay, one story point equals 4 hours of development. That 4 hours of development may not be all in one single block. It may be spread across multiple blocks of time, but we almost always tie those story points, those estimations, to time, because that's the thing that we understand. And as a developer, I can more easily say that, oh, to build this feature, I think will take me 3 days. That may or may not be the case. That may or may not factor in all of the other pieces that are required to fully deliver that feature into production. But we need to make sure that we are factoring in quality assurance, testing, peer reviews between developers, anything else that's required to get a feature tested and delivered.
And from your perspective, do software developers factor those things in when they're estimating?
Sometimes.
I see a lot of underestimation, and I'm always trying to, there may be different reasons. There may be different reasons for it. Some of it we didn't, talk enough about the story up front. There are all these unforeseen things that have happened. We were very, very optimistic, and we wanted to be a yes person to the product owner. So there's all sorts of things that may factor in, but how, as Scrum Masters, can we encourage the developers to, as best as they can before they hit go on the story, to factor all those things in? And is it worth it to spend that upfront time conversing about it?
I absolutely think that it is worth that time. One of the more important pieces of the kind of the Scrum framework, or the process, that I think is important and often neglected, are the grooming sessions, and our ability to go through and refine the stories and refine the stories. So often as engineers, we're given a very high level, almost just a title and a very brief description. And as engineers, we say, okay, I can take that and build that, because I am excited about creating a solution with technology, and not necessarily as focused on creating the right solution that's actually what we need as a business to drive us forward. So I think as a Scrum Master, it would help to always push back until we get into the habit of making sure that stories have all the information that they need, have well-defined acceptance criteria. They have factored in not only the development time, but also the quality assurance time. Maybe I'm waiting on another, say, a third-party service that may deliver what we need in time and may not. I deal a lot with this around using a third-party translation service for some of our internationalization work. I can send my request to them, but I don't really have a lot of control on when I might get that information back. How do we deal with that in a 2-week sprint when I have something out there that is dependent, that I'm dependent on to be able to deliver my feature?
Yeah, it's tough. There's a lot of things a lot of balls in the air, a lot of things to kind of keep track of. Yeah, before we open it up for questions, anything else that you want to convey to Scrum Masters in general? I don't know, based on some of the things we talked about outside of this conversation.
Yeah, I think it's engineers in general are interested and excited to deliver good quality features. We really do want to do good work. And I think we just need some help in understanding what it is that we need to be doing. What should we be focusing on? We can get distracted very easily. We can go down rabbit holes. Stand-up meetings in the morning are something that I have seen go from 5 minutes to 55 minutes. And if we're not cognizant and careful about it, we can have a lot of very detailed implementation focused conversations in a startup, or in a stand-up meeting where it's just not appropriate. And so I think just continually focusing on what is the purpose of this meeting? What is the purpose of this user story or epic? And let's make sure that we continue to focus there. And we're kind of always pulling ourselves back in, and we're holding each other accountable, both from Scrum Masters and from developers as well.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for saying that, because that triggered my memory about that, because you did mention that to me about, because I think from the Scrum Master perspective, sometimes we feel uncomfortable interrupting and redirecting the conversation because we don't want to stop that conversation, because it may be really important for them to talk about whatever it is they're talking about. And we don't want to say like time out, parking lot. But it's good to hear from your perspective that that's really necessary. And you folks on the other side of the table, so to speak, feel that. And it almost gives us permission to really stick with the time box, because you are sitting here telling us that you need it.
We do. That's
Thank
where
you.
we can go on tangents and we can spend a lot of time. And stand-ups, they should be short, they should be quick. And we have to be very careful about that time.
Super. Thank you so much, Brian. Let's open this up to questions. You know, we're at about 6:11 here on the East Coast. So I don't know, people, you know, feel free if you want to call them out, if you want to put them in the chat, I'll take a look. Jasper, you got something for us?
Unmuted?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, cool. Well, yeah, I'm from the Netherlands, so it's midnight, so better ask questions while I'm still functioning a little bit. I hear a lot of recognizable situations, and it's very, sorry for my English, by the way, I'm doing my best. Yeah, it is what it is.
Sure.
And Brian, the time box. I didn't know it was that important. I did know 15 minutes, same place, discuss the goal, what are we going to do today, and what want we to achieve.
Mhm.
But keep it short, because
Yes.
I know, yeah, from experience, you get distracted,
Mhm.
you lose time, right? And like Patty said, how do I translate this? Sorry. Yeah, as a non-technical, I'm half technical Scrum Master. Yeah, you have the feeling that the discussion is more valuable while it's actually taking away the efficiency of the work the developers are doing. So that's a plus for my daily Scrum. And another thing, refine accurate estimate. Yeah, story points. Yeah, from my perspective, grooming sessions, indeed, be prepared before you plan, right?
Mhm.
I think you need technical information. A product owner needs to have some more information, questions. They need to be answered before the planning session, right? And so, yeah, very, but accurate estimation. I don't know. And why not? Yeah, like Patty said, it's still used by making calculations, deadlines, when can we get this to production, how many hours is how many story points, that kind of stuff. And how do I make this clear? So yeah, I'm going
Work
back
in
into the field,
progress.
and I'm going to shut up. I promise you I'll shut up. I'm going to do, yeah, and I don't know the English word for it or the American word. Yeah, I go from job to job,
Contractor.
right? A contractor. Thank you, Betty.
Yes, yes.
So this is the first time I'm doing this, and yeah, this is definitely something accurate estimation that need to make clear.
And that's a great point that you bring up, Jasper, because Scrum Masters are often contractors, and they do have to jump in and out of companies, in and out of teams. And that's something that you need to give yourself grace with, because it takes you like 3 months to onboard to figure out what's going on. So give yourself some grace with all of it. And then, like Brian said, just ask really good questions. Ask them, what does this mean? Yeah. All right. Thank you, Jasper. I think we have a
Yeah,
couple
so
of other.
the other things were perfectly clear. So
Sure.
thanks, Brian. Penny.
Sure. We have some
Yeah.
hands up. Emanuela, is your hand raised for a question?
Yes, but I think there was somebody before me. Sherry?
Sherry.
Sherry.
Okay, I'm
No.
no hurry. I have a question about developers as a Scrum Master, and like you're like a senior, architect. How, and you're constantly getting hit up from maybe other teams and stuff all the time. How would you like handled to like, for me as a Scrum Master, to push back on people and be like, hey, kind of like leave him alone, he needs to work, and stuff, or like time box out, like how do you like to have that handled as a very like senior, architect level?
Great question.
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. I think for me, so I like to approach my day of, I understand when I can best focus, right? Very deep focus versus I may not be able to focus as well. So those are great times that then I can interact with someone. So a lot of times we'll hear terms like flow, deep work. So development, just software engineering in general, is very cognitively taxing. A good engineer is able to kind of load a lot of the software system into their working memory, and they kind of hold it there. And then they'll work and do, just create a lot within a very short period of time if they're able to get into that flow state, if they're able to really deeply focus. So what happens often is if we only have short chunks of time, 30 minutes and then an hour between meetings, and we're constantly getting those pings, it's very, very challenging to get into that state, and we're not able to produce as high of quality. So what I typically like to do is I'll personally block off my entire morning where it's, I will turn off notifications. I will not allow meetings to be put onto my calendar during those times, because I know that's when I'm going to be able to work best. And I think, the same could happen for any engineers on your team. They may have different time periods where they're able to have that deep focus. Oftentimes this is referred to as the maker, which are our engineers, and the manager schedule. Right, manager schedules have just meetings, kind of scattershot across their calendar, where engineers really want to have those deep blocks of time. So to get to your question, I think the best way that you might be able to help is to collect those questions and kind of give them to the engineer at the beginning of the day or the end of the day, so that we're able to focus and prioritize on the work that we need to deliver on before we're then able to concentrate on the work that, or the questions that are being asked.
Okay.
Engineers like to be yes people very, very often. So if we're brought a question or a request, chances are pretty good that we're going to jump on that. So we can get distracted very easily. So anything that you can do to help prioritize, whether it's among the team or cross team, is huge. Being able to push back on other teams to say, yes, we can take some time to explore that once we've finished the work that we've committed to already. And a lot of times we can take a look at that when we start to plan for our next sprint. And just continually kind of pushing back on that. And what I've seen happen is if we're able to push back on those requests, then we continue to deliver at a high level, and other teams start to understand why it is that we're pushing back and prioritizing.
Yep. Okay. Awesome. Thank you. Our company's going through a lot of like people leaving, devs leaving and stuff. And so now there's like a handful of people in our like legacy system that are just getting hit up all the time and stuff. And that's, one thing I'm, trying to work on. So.
Yes, that situation is extremely challenging. And what's going to happen is you increase what's often referred to as your lottery factor, right? What are the chances of one of those developers hitting the lottery and then they're gone? walking away with all that knowledge. So we have to start to capture that knowledge the best we can.
Yep. Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great point, because from a Scrum Master perspective, that really validates our role as the shield. And Brian, again, thank you for saying that, because it's giving us permission to do that. You want us to be that shield for you. You meaning, right, the collective developer community, because we hear about this. We hear about it in our Scrum certification class. They talk about it all over the place, the shield of the team. But you're giving us permission to do that you want us to do that.
Please.
Does anything about scheduling the Scrum events factor into what you just talked about?
I think it's important to come up with just a time that works best for the team. I like when teams are able to all agree on a certain time for their daily stand-ups. Maybe we don't need to meet in person daily. Maybe we can do asynchronous a couple days a week. You're just kind of coming up with a good cadence there, but consistency is huge. Grooming, retrospectives, demos, all of those, same thing, a regular cadence, and do our best to keep them, especially retrospectives. I find that those will get deprioritized very, very often. And so what ends up happening is there's a lot that happens over several sprints worth of work that we don't have an opportunity to unpack and deal with. And so it can kind of all bubble up into one big, hairy retrospective.
All right, thank you for keeping us honest, because it's very easy to just cancel those things. So love it. Okay, let's go to Emanuela. You still got your question?
Yes. Thank you so much, Patty. And thank you, Brian. I feel like we won the lottery tonight, honestly, because I'm going to be real fast.
I told you so. He's awesome.
Yes, you did, Patty. And please pardon me, because I think I'm going to be putting a lot here. And the reason is because I've had the opportunity to also listen to the questions that came before me. So first one is, thank you so much about talking about the pushback, because sometimes you go in there, you're supposed to be this coach, this mentor, this facilitator, but it's like you're on a battlefield and you're like, these are supposed to be my team members. What's going on here? So thank you, Brian. But first question, bearing in mind that, like the other question, Kate touched on it, the shared resource, right? Sometimes you have to kind of push and push and push, and even have to kind of like suck up to this person and beg them, can I just put my team on your calendar for 30 minutes? We need kind of like, not so much as knowledge transfer, but we need your help to teach us this or that, so we don't keep bugging you, right? And it happens, and eventually everybody is happy. That doesn't become such a huge permanent dependency anymore. And then something else comes up. It's like you're constantly just fielding missiles, right? But the main thing I always say is, some organizations think being a Scrum Master is like a silver bullet. I'm not complaining, but we're not coming there to fix that. And I think that's one of the reasons developers have this defensive attitude, because there's nothing wrong with them. Don't come here to try to fix something, right? It's the mindset. And I try to explain to people, Scrum Masters coach, right? But the organization has to be fully on board, even when it's not 100%. It has to be something that you can feel as you walk through the door, that they are really serious, they are really accepting. But that's oftentimes not the case, which is why we walk into this battlefield. And, so I'm just trying to say all this to say, I have found that the biggest struggle has been, how do you start the transformation? How do you start that when a company says to you, We're relying on you to coach them. There will be some resistance, but this is what we expect of you. Where do you start from? I mean, textbooks tell us you do this observations, you do, no, like you know what I'm talking about. Can you just tell me, if somebody said to me, Manuela, I need you to start this agile transformation for my team, assuming that the team doesn't have a high number on the evaluation agility assessment, what will be the first 3 things you would tell me as a Scrum Master that you, as the tech lead or architect, solutions architect, expect of me as your Scrum Master? What are the first 3 things that you need from me?
Good question.
Yeah, absolutely. Really good question. The first thing I would ask is why? What is it that we're trying to solve by going through an agile transformation? And I think you said it well, that oftentimes agile is presented as the silver bullet. Once we implement this, we are golden. We know exactly how much we can create, how long it's going to take, how many resources it's going to take. And I think a lot of that comes from the factory mentality of, I have this many developers, they're going to work this many hours, and they're going to produce this many widgets. And unfortunately, that does not hold at all. So if we can start by first understanding, why do we need to transform? What is it that we're trying to solve for? And how can we potentially leverage some of the aspects of Agile to be able to deliver on that particular promise? I think another area that I see a lot with trying to roll out big Agile initiatives is that we tend to over allocate resources. We put a lot of capacity into our sprints, and I think that's very challenging if you're very early on. Maybe you're already doing Agile, but maybe it's a new team or a new project. If we put too much capacity in and we don't leave enough margin in our sprints, that can be challenging as well. We're still trying to figure out what it is that we're doing, how it is that we're working together. Teams, they go through that natural ebb and flow where we have to kind of figure out what it is that we're working on and how we can best do that together.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
I think we have time for one more question. Sharika, did you have a question?
No, I don't. It was earlier when you was, asking who was interested and if they, about the whole interview phase. That's when I raised my hand.
Okay, I think if you press the reaction again, it'll take it down.
All right, no problem. Thank you.
You're just giving me like this nonstop high five. All right, so Gabe, I know you had your hand up, it came down, but it's up again. So you'll be our final question for this evening. What do you got for us?
Yeah, so the question that I have is, in which areas do you feel like Scrum Masters can improve to better serve the product owner and the developers? I see some Scrum Masters learning even some basic programming languages or the cloud or, DevOps stuff. Like, can you tell us more about that?
Sure. I think from a technical perspective, getting an understanding of what it takes to develop software. So really kind of thinking about the software development lifecycle and the ways that can ebb and flow and change over the course of software being developed. And it really is, it's a living, breathing thing that needs care and feeding. And that's where a lot of times, again, comparing software to something in the physical world falls apart, is because software is continuously growing all the way until we kind of turn off the servers that are hosting the software. But up until that point, the software, it requires care and maintenance. Understanding that is kind of the course that software will take is really, really helpful. Understanding some of the terminologies, some of the languages that are being used, showing some curiosity there. Absolutely. I think that's great to have, just so that you can have a better understanding of the conversations that are happening, but really pushing back on developers when they say that something is going to take an inordinate amount of time. Dig into understanding why they think that's the case. And really, again, just showing that curiosity goes a long, long way, because we really are eager to teach and to talk about the technology that we use to solve problems.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
You bet.
All right. Any final thoughts? I don't know, Brian, any last minute words of wisdom or advice for us?
We're all in this together. If we can work as a team, we really can deliver great things. And I've been fortunate to be a part of a lot of fun, exciting projects. And it really was a combination of product and Scrum Masters and the development team that enabled us to be able to do that. Show curiosity, show excitement, and we really can deliver great things.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate you coming here and giving us this vital perspective, because to your point, we're all in this together. So it's more beneficial if we understand each other and where each other is coming from, because then that builds the trust, right? Then we're on the same side as opposed to opposite sides.
Absolutely.
Excellent.
It's been my
Thank
pleasure.
you. Thank you so much. All right, so I have a few folks that are interested in that workshop. I did go and put the Eventbrite link in the chat, but I'll reach out to you folks. And as I mentioned, I will be cleaning up the recording and I'll be emailing it out within the next few days to everybody. And thank you, Brian. Thank you so much. We loved having you. You were awesome. And maybe sometime we can do this again.
That'd be great. It was my pleasure. Thank you, Patty.
Okay, enjoy your business trip.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, folks. See you next week.